All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to explore a deeply personal, honestly surprisingly powerful microcosm of the Second World War. We so often study history by looking at the big stuff, the massive troop movements, the famous generals, those huge dates you memorize in school. But today, we're taking a completely different approach. We are going to zoom all the way in on a single American family, the Seavers, specifically in May of 1944. Just by looking at two letters from this one exact month, we're going to unpack this incredible, stark contrast between the quiet, mundane joy of daily life and the massive, looming shadow of a global conflict. It is a totally fascinating story, so let's get started. To really get this, we first need to anchor ourselves in a very specific time and place. Set the scene with me. Our setting is San Diego, California. The date is May 1944. Now, on the surface, the scene we're looking at through these letters is incredibly peaceful. It's a sunny, domestic setting. A young mother named Betty is sitting at a secretary desk in her living room. The evening is kind of settling in around her, and her baby is sleeping right down the hall. I mean, it sounds perfectly idyllic, right? But we know what's happening outside of that quiet living room. The entire world is at war. D-Day is literally just weeks away, and the Pacific Theater is raging. And this brilliantly sets up the central question we're going to explore today. Basically, how do you build a normal life when the whole world is at war? That's the core tension of this explainer. Think about the incredible juxtaposition happening here. You've got a mother tracking her baby taking his very first steps, while at the exact same moment, entire nations are locked in this desperate struggle for survival. How did families on the home front balance those beautiful, everyday milestones of a growing family with the terrifying reality of what was happening overseas? Section 1. Life on the home front. We actually get a glimpse into this reality through a letter Betty writes on May 7th. She's writing to her mother-in-law, Bessie, and her sister-in-law, Jerry, who are all the way across the country in Leominster, Massachusetts. And the sheer warmth and normalcy pouring out of her words is just incredible. She writes, "Randy is 7 months old now and is the most interesting person I have ever met." She goes on to talk about him sitting up, surveying the world with this profound satisfaction. She proudly reports he's got 2 bottom teeth coming in. And I love this detail. She says he has this specific expression of deep concentration, which she playfully calls the signature Seaver look, just like his father, Fred. In this moment, she is miles away from the war. She is just a proud mom, eager to share her joy with relatives who are too far away to see the baby grow. So what did their actual days look like? Well, their entire daily rhythm is highly structured. Her husband, Fred, works incredibly long, demanding hours at the Rohr Defense Plant in Chula Vista. He comes home absolutely exhausted. But the whole day, for both of them really, is organized around one specific hour in the evening. It's the hour Fred gets to just sit with baby Randy before bed. Betty writes about how Randy is starting to truly recognize faces, and when Fred walks through the door, the baby's whole body reacts before a single word is spoken. Fred will actually stand in the doorway an extra moment just to soak in that feeling of being known and loved like that by his son. It's just a beautiful, quiet, domestic routine. And all of this is happening against a backdrop of stunning natural beauty. Listen to this quote from the letter. "San Diego in May is the world trying to show off." Betty talks about how perfect the weather almost always is. This idyllic micro-setting, the perfect weather, a healthy baby, these quiet evenings, it creates an almost surreal contrast to the macro reality of 1944. Because, no matter how beautiful the San Diego spring is, they cannot entirely shut out the war. Section 2. The looming draft question. We kind of need to shift our tone slightly here because underneath the surface of this sunny domestic life, there is a very real, very heavy anxiety haunting the Seavers. For Fred and Betty, the military draft is a constant shadow. Now, Fred currently has a deferment because his work at the Rohr Defense Plant is considered vital to the war effort. He's working a materials desk, and apparently he's very good at it. But they both know the deferments can change at literally any moment. The possibility of Fred being called up by the draft board is this quiet weight that sits right alongside the joy of their new baby. Betty addresses this directly in her letter to Massachusetts. She writes, "I will tell you plainly that the draft question is on our minds." She notes that Fred handles this worry with his typical quiet stoicism. He doesn't complain or talk about it constantly, but she knows he's working it over in his head. The whole family knows they can't just cross their fingers and hope for the best. They have to be absolutely realistic about what might happen next week or even next month. To handle all this uncertainty, they built a contingency plan. While they obviously hope the Rohr deferment holds up, they've agreed that if Fred is drafted, Betty and baby Randy won't stay out on their own. They'll immediately pack up and move to her parents' family house on Fern Street. Betty reassures her mother-in-law, telling her not to worry, that they are well-loved and well-situated, and they will manage whatever comes their way. This is such a great example of the practical safety nets that home front families had to carefully string up. You're to plan for life-altering disruptions at a moment's notice.
Section 3. The Gunboat Captain's Letter.
Then, just over a week later, the outside world intrudes on their quiet life in a very direct way. A letter arrives for Fred, postmarked from Portland, Oregon. It's from Fred's younger brother, Ed. Now, Fred recognizes Ed's precise, engineer-like handwriting immediately. Ed went through officer candidate school up in Maine the previous year and got his Lieutenant JG commission back in November. Now he's writing to Fred and Betty with major, life-changing news about his military assignment. Ed reveals his exact naval assignment. He writes, "I am to be the captain of LCIG 728. He tells Fred that his ship is currently being fitted out up in Portland. This is a massive, massive moment. The younger brother isn't just serving, he has been given command of a ship. Okay, so what exactly is this ship? LCIG stands for Landing Craft Infantry, the gunboat variant. Basically, it's a small, very fast naval vessel, heavily armed and specifically designed to provide close-in fire support during those really dangerous amphibious landings. Ed admits in his letter that captaining an LCI wasn't exactly what he envisioned when he enlisted, but you know what? He says he's actually learned to love the boat. It's fast, and he says his crew is as good as any he could ask for. They are ready to do their job. But before they head out to the fight, there is a totally complex logistical dance taking place. Ed's ship is sailing down the coast to San Diego in June. At the exact same time, Ed's wife Janet and their son Peter, who, by the way, Ed warns has recently learned how to run, they're traveling all the way from Massachusetts. The plan is for everyone to stay with Aunt Emily in Kensington. Ed is urgently arranging this one last massive family reunion. He explicitly writes to Fred that he wants real time with him. He knows that draft board is looming over Fred, and Ed just wants to sit at a table, eat good food, and actually talk with his older brother before everything changes for both of them. Section 4. Facing the Pacific. This right here brings us to the emotional climax of our story. We see Fred and Betty reading this letter at their kitchen table, absorbing the heavy reality of Ed's orders. I mean, think about the incredibly complex emotions Fred must be feeling here, as he looks at his reality versus his brother's. On the one hand, Fred is sitting safe at a Mercurial's desk in Chula Vista, waiting for a draft board. On the other hand, his younger brother, Ed, is a commissioned officer, commanding a gunboat, heading straight into combat. There's immense pride for his brother for sure, but there's also deep worry and undoubtedly a really complex guilt associated with his own temporary safety. And the timeline laid out in Ed's letter makes it all incredibly, undeniably real. Walk through this with me. In June, the gunboat arrives in San Diego. In July, they get their precious weeks of family reunion, where baby Randy and toddler Peter will finally meet. But then comes that final point. August 1944. Ed states clearly that he expects to deploy to the Pacific Fleet. So the relief that Ed is currently safe and coming to visit, it's immediately undercut by this heavy, suffocating dread attached to that August date. And honestly, I think the most heartbreaking part of the letter is the postscript. Ed signs off and then adds, LCIG 728. She is a fine boat, Fred. She is a fine boat. You can just hear the younger brother trying to reassure his older brother, right? He is projecting confidence. He wants Fred to know that he's going into the Pacific in a good ship, just trying to ease the burden of worry. After reading the letter and that postscript, there's a quiet moment at the kitchen table. Fred sets the paper down, looks at his wife Betty, and finally just speaks the plain, terrifying truth out loud. He says he's going to the Pacific in August. He just strips away all the logistics, all the excitement of the reunion, and names the fear that is sitting right there in the room with them. And how does Betty respond? She reaches right across the table, takes his hand, and says firmly, "He'll come home, Fred." And Fred agrees. The source material notes that they say this completely without qualification because some decisions, once you make them, need to be held without wobbling. They have to choose to believe in survival, right then and there, just to keep each other steady in the face of an incredibly uncertain world. Which brings us to our final thought. While baby Randy sleeps safely in his crib down the hall, completely unaware of gunboats or draft boards or the Pacific Ocean, his parents are holding hands across a kitchen table, carrying the emotional burden of a world at war. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? While history remembers the massive battles and the famous generals, how much of the war's true weight was actually carried at quiet kitchen tables just like this one? It's a humbling reminder that historical epochs are ultimately defined by these quiet, deeply human moments. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.